Well, we are gathered in this session after thought-provoking morning presentation to continue the dialogue on the outlook of University of Tomorrow. With so much changes that are taking place, the worldwide, both technologically and demographically, most of the time, none of us are prepared or trained to take on such challenges at this level of scale. So what will be the University of Tomorrow look like? Will online education be the norm, or will a blended model face-to-face? We can speculate at many levels, but the central question may be, are we driving the changes, or is university just keeping up with the rapidly changing technology and the demand from society? Or does all evolve on the technological ecosystem of continuous changes that will take place in the future, like a spiral in the whirlpool? The language of crisis is nothing new in higher education. For the last 3 decades, critics have raised alarms about rising tuitions and compromised access, out-of-control costs, and a host of other issues. Yet, through those issues are still part of the current issues, except that it is not the same as the past ones, that which we all have experienced in the last half-centuries. For the first time, disruptive technologies, or should I call it innovative technologies, are at work in higher education. And for most of their histories, traditional universities and colleges have no serious competition except from the institution with similar operating models. At this point of time of history, transformation of higher education is no longer an option, but it is a question of survival. So for this session, we invited distinguished speakers to share their thoughts on these mind-boggling topics. And I would like to introduce Professor Kumiko Aoki from the Open University of Japan, and SOKENDAI will share her findings of is the University of Tomorrow better than the University of today?
I don't know what the University of Tomorrow looked like, but I do know what Singapore in general and our university in particular are doing to prepare our learners for a workplace that requires certain skills. So I have a lot more slides than I can show in about 20-25 minutes. What I'm going to do is to try and focus on some key messages and leave the other slides uncommented on. The slides can be made available to you, and if you would like to speak to me about specific bits that I did not talk about, we can always speak about that for the rest of the conference. So to start with, this is not my first slide. Yes, thank you. In any teaching and learning ecosystem, I believe that we will immediately think about various key stakeholders and various factors that would shape the way we deliver education. An obvious and important stakeholder are the learners. And in a traditional university setup, we're used to thinking of students as totally on campus. They may live outside campus or live on campus, but their education is catered for totally within campus. We also are used to thinking of professors as totally full-time professors attached to one particular university within a program within a university. We are also used to thinking of pedagogy in a very specific way. For the longest time, many of us have delivered our classes in a lecture tutorial system. For some of us who conduct labs, we would have lab activities. These are all traditional setups. And in terms of learning spaces, we are very specific about the kinds of formal learning spaces that learning ought to take place, namely the classroom. But we do notice that in today's world, many of these traditional thinking about students, about instructors, about learning spaces, about pedagogy has changed drastically. These days, we have a diversity of student profile. Students who live on campus and don't always expect the entire curriculum to be delivered on campus. Students who are totally off campus, who then would have to have learning delivered to them online and not necessarily have to show up on campus during off hours. Basically, our postgraduate programs are delivered in the evenings to cater to students who have to work. And in terms of instructors, instead of just full-time instructors totally attached to an institution, I've recently heard of the term surrogate professor, where a course can be totally designed by somebody, exported elsewhere, and have a professor in that other institution deliver that course. That's a surrogate professor. And because you have online teaching, you also need to have online instructing teams supporting it, teaching assistants who are, for the most part, faceless to students other than the facilitation they are doing online. So given this kind of a complex ecosystem with things changing, can we then continue to maintain the traditional categories that we are so used to? The categories of what's in class, what's outside class, what's on campus, what's off campus. In NUS, we believe that we now need to move towards a new model. And that model is not just about blended teaching and learning. It's a model that requires us to treat both groups of students, whether they are online or offline, as an integrated group of students who require specific kinds of learning activities to help them achieve the outcomes that we promise them that we will deliver. And we also have to start thinking in terms of blended pedagogy. So in other words, it's not that because you have students who are fully off campus, therefore do online learning. You have students who are on campus, therefore you don't have to worry about online learning. The distinction between online, offline, on campus, off campus is now very much blurred. Instead, what we would like to do is to design courses that are integrated with activities that's both online and offline, and we treat all the entire learning community as one. In other words, if they are on campus, it's because the activity requires them to be on campus. If it's online, it's because the activity requires them to be online, not because of where they are, who they are, and so forth. Our main guide in this sort of thinking then is course design and course outcomes, and not artificial demarcation of physical classroom spaces or timetable learning times. So what will tomorrow be like? Well, some observations, and some of these have already been, points have been made in previous sessions. In many ways, the University of Tomorrow is already here. We are already coping with changes and trends that are as yet unclear to us, but nevertheless are in need of institutional responses. We've noticed that there's a lot of misalignment between the ways of the world and our educational practices, as also observed by Rajay Naik this morning when he talked about the mismatch between educational lives and our lives out there in the world. And there is a need for adapting good current practices and integrating that with the pedagogies and the technological affordances that are available to us. The following couple of snippets are just examples that we are out by now all very familiar with about our full reliance on technology, at least in some very developed societies. Here is one account given by a Mr. Joshua Kim on Inside Higher Ed just in early 2014, where he realized how much reliance he is on his mobile phone from the time he steps out of his house to get to Delft to attend an edX consortium. Everything from boarding passes to conference program to finding his way around in Delft to then keeping back in touch with his family back in the States, everything was on the mobile phone, which then triggered the question of what would I do if my phone is lost? So the existential danger of losing my mobile phone. When I gave this example in Hong Kong just last month, somebody in the audience told me that the existential danger of losing a mobile phone in Singapore is very real. As a Singaporean, I understand that. We used to walk out of a house and realize that we have left our phone at home and say, oh, well, whatever, no calls for the day. But nowadays, when you leave your home and you realize that you have not had your mobile phone with you, you go home and get it, right? Because your life just cannot go on without that phone. So this is Mr. Kim's own conclusion. My iPhone has changed me. I'm both more free and more dependent, more agile and more vulnerable. I'm empowered and enslaved by this small screen. Very ambivalent. And here is a feature from a newspaper in Singapore, a student riding our subway and having very much, Singapore's penetration in terms of internet is extremely high. Many students and many people own at least 2, if not 3 or 4 gadgets. So this is a common sight. Everybody is watching a Korean movie, talking to their friends on Facebook or texting or just generally listening to music, tuned out to the entire world, on the subway and everywhere. And so this student, basically, the caption is, do you want to see my movies or my homework? You know this is Singapore because you get the Singaporean English. Do you want to see movies? So what would you give if you have one whole day of free internet access? I caught this on BBC yesterday when I arrived. BBC apparently conducted some kind of a poll and asked young people, if you had one free day of free internet access, what would you give up? And some of the responses gotten were, I would not eat. I would not shower. I would give up sex. So to me, what's fascinating is not so much the answer. It is the fact that this question is even asked. That if you have free internet access for one entire day, what would you do? What would you give up? And people actually have an answer for that. That tells us something about the expectation of connectivity. So students do prefer, according to this EduCore survey of 12,000 people, students do prefer blended learning environments, and students are very much ready to use their devices for academic work. They look to us, the instructors, for opportunities and encouragement. In many ways, the barrier is with the instructor, not so much with students. Well, students, while they prefer blended learning environments, they like it for reasons of convenience afforded by the mobility. But only a small minority of students asked were actually totally comfortable with an education that is wholly online. Hence, the preference by students for a hybrid model. We do hear students still saying, I have paid high tuition fee. Why is my education online? Where is the instructor? So depending on the nature of the learner, just because they have a high comfort level with devices and mobility and expectation of access, it does not mean, therefore, they are independent learners. They still need to be guided to learn independently using their devices, which is why when it comes to education, there are many students who still do prefer the face-to-face tutorial. There's a sense of insecurity if the education is fully online. Here's just another anecdote of how technology has knocked on medical practice, where instead of the old trusted black bag, physicians are now Googling for information. I'm sure it's quite a common experience these days to go to a consultant, a medical consultant, and then have that person actually Google something, print it out, and give it to you for your own reading when you get home. Now, nationally, Singapore is actively pursuing a Smart Nation initiative right now. The thinking has been going on for a couple of years, but in the past year, the activity level has gone up a lot. The Smart Nation, according to our Prime Minister, is not just a slogan. It's important to say that because Singapore is well known as a campaign city. We have a campaign for almost everything. So he's very quick in reminding us that Smart Nation is not just a campaign. Your life will change. It's going to change when the government integrates the entire city-state in a way that would seamlessly integrate your life and your work. This is largely in response not just to high expectation for connectivity in a city-state like Singapore. It is also because Singapore is facing an aging population. And because of that, there is an intense build-up on community and allied health care. Quite a bit of this Smart Nation thing involve all the different ministries, everything from housing to healthcare to defense, where on the healthcare front, the idea is patients with senior age patients, or patients with mobility issues no longer have to run to a clinic to see a doctor, that they would be able to converse with their doctor and hold consultation from within their home when the city is so wired up. So in 2013, Inside Higher Ed surveyed provosts on what they think about MOOCs and other things. And this is what they thought about MOOCs back in 2013. Perhaps things might have changed, but at that time, 47% of all provosts strongly or very strongly agreed that MOOCs could threaten the business model of their institution. So when it came to MOOCs, high-level administrators often think of it as a threat rather than as an opportunity. I'm lucky to belong to an institution where both my president and my provost think of it very much as an opportunity, and therefore it makes a lot of work for me. How should we all respond to this new reality? Well, how shall we teach and how shall our students learn, or how will our students learn, particularly in a place where the university makes it its business to be globalized, to be well connected, and to have students' outcomes being a major focus in their learning experience, and in a city-state where the nation is going towards Smart Nation? What do we do? Well, I would like to share this quotation from Michael Fullan about change in general, because I think tech-enhanced education is not so much about technology per se, it's about change management. It is not as if we can avoid change, since it pursues us in every way. We might as well then make the best of it. The answer is not in avoiding change, but in turning the tables by facing it head-on. The new mindset is to exploit change before it victimizes us, and therefore turn threat into opportunity. I will skip the next few slides. This one is from a conference that I attended last year, held at my university. A graduate student from the School of Computing, Ernest Adu, made this presentation where his point was basically that the convergence of learning affordance of technology and the convergence of new learner-centric paradigms is such that it behooves us as instructors to adopt and adapt to the technological affordances. He spoke about the movement from e-learning tied to computers to mobile learning tied to tablets and mobile devices, to ubiquitous learning of different kinds of devices, to smart learning where context and interaction are critical. He summarized this in this paragraph. E-learning extended the reach and support of education, but relied on tethered computers and hence was bound by these tethers, allowing learning to occur anytime and anywhere. With the emergence of low-cost embedded sensors and, more importantly, sensor-equipped smart mobile devices with the capacity to accumulate and analyze information about the learner and his or her environments, the exploitation of the learner's contextual information to provide adaptive, personalized learning, services has become central to learning, orchestrating the context-aware ubiquitous learning. So is it an opportunity or crisis? Well, this morning, the little poll that we saw felt that at least 2021 voted for opportunity and about 7 for challenges. I was thinking that I'm quite sure that the 20 or 21 who voted for opportunity also thought about the challenges, because it is challenging even as it offers us opportunity. Well, here is one opportunity. Online learning is more social than many of us imagine it to be. The peer presence has translated into learning support for many. This comes across quite strongly from our MOOC experience on the Coursera platform. Here's another opportunity. We now have the means to bring learners together online to optimize on connective power of online communities. How could we go about harnessing this power of social networks and peer presence to inform the way we facilitate learning? And these are the two things that I think is sorely lacking in the way we teach and learn in traditional university setup. Harnessing the peer presence and also facilitating learning through the social networks. Online learning, says a US education report, is successful because it gives learners control of their interaction with media and prompting teacher reflection. I think this emphasis on the control that we are giving back to learners when we put things online for access at their own time, own place is very important. 5 minutes? Only 1 minute, oh gosh.